Hello and welcome to Power to the People with me, Graeme Pryce. Now, I have made a video or two about Lee Anderson before, but he's never had a dedicated 5 reasons video made about him. When I first started this channel, he was one of the very first MPs that I made a video about, but that's been made private now, along with some of my other earlier efforts. Might unlock them for members or something one day. I was surprised to see Lee Anderson held onto his seat. Throughout most of the election, it didn't look very likely that he would. Of course, then Farage came into the fray, didn't he? He dragged 30p Lee and reformUK along with him, allowing Lee to win a majority in Ashfield. That was actually slightly larger than the majority he had when he was standing as a Tory MP, believe it or not. Watching him win was definitely a low point on election night. But, you know, you'd have to take the rough with the smooth, don't you? And at least it gives me a chance to dive into the treasure trove of dick-headed things he's done and said over the years, so we can all have a laugh at him, which we'll do right after this. I was just looking at my channel analytics and I noticed that 53% of people who watch my videos weren't subscribed. The pain. Come on, just have a quick check that you've subbed, liked and rang the bell. Make a skinny old scouser a little bit happier today. If Lee Anderson had not managed to bumble and stumble his way into what some might charitably call a career in politics, I think he'd be a very different man. You see, the days when you could expect somebody who had been elected to a seat in Parliament to be a decent, upstanding individual had died with Boris fucking Johnson's tenure. 30p Lee is exactly the type of useful idiot that exemplifies the type of MPs that ballbag Johnson stuffed his party with. Stupid, pliable, useful idiots. Jonathan Gullis springs to mind. Had he not been such a useful idiot, I think it's reasonable to suggest that Lee would have been, rioting alongside a few other useful idiots in the last few weeks. Lee doesn't mix with very nice people, and as is often true with characters that are blessed with less brains than a garden slug, he's a very impressionable man. He spends a lot of his time on Twitter, presumably believing everything he sees the worst right-wing grifters who agree with him say. Back when Suella Braverman was still Home Secretary and was trying to use racism and culture wars to secure her leadership bid, if nothing else, he was asked to discuss an article she'd written on GB News. Despite the fact that the clearly racist, corrupt and incompetent Tories were still in control of the country at the time, and he was still part of them, Lee proclaimed his most dumbass of beliefs yet, saying, "The truth is that Islamists, the extremists and the anti-Semites are in control of this country." And he followed it up with, "I don't actually believe the Islamists are in control of the whole country, but they've got control of London, and they've got control of Khan, and they've got control of Starmer." There was, and there still is, no evidence whatsoever that this is even remotely true, of course, but he refused to apologise, and he said that although he'd used clumsy language, he didn't change his sentiment. And it led to him having the whip removed, and then defecting to reformUK, and the rest's history. But apparently they like him at reformUK, I would imagine, and undercurrent of continual racism and the ability to tell lies about Muslims is quite attractive around there, apparently. If you were to use Twitter to delve into the history of the sheer stupidity and ignorance that Lee Anderson likes to perpetuate on a daily basis, you will find a few phrases that he uses quite a lot, especially during his time as a Conservative MP. The Tories were very proud of themselves when they used the Trumpian device of giving Keir Starmer nicknames like Mr. Hindsight or FlipFlopper, weren't they? Yeah. Somehow, they seem to think that having a leader who is capable of changing direction when massive events like a global pandemic or war breaking out in Europe happens is a bad thing. Although, of course, when Rishi Sunak decided to change his course of action because things had, altered and cancelled HS2, Lee didn't think he was being a flip-flopper. No, not in public anyway. In fact, Lee has done a little bit of flip-flopping himself. He's flipped and flopped and slimed and slopped his way through 3 political parties now. He entered politics as a Labour councillor, but he never lasted very long, as he said appalling things about the local traveller community and then took the law into his own hands to prevent them entering a site where Lee and some local NIMBYs had decided that they shouldn't be allowed to go. He somehow managed to become a Tory councillor after that though, which shows the respect that whoever decides who's allowed to become Tory councillors has for the law, doesn't it? He brown-nosed his way through the Tory ranks and became the candidate for the constituency of Ashfield, which he won for the Conservatives in 2019, as we probably shudder to remember. I find it very difficult to believe that a man who could go from supporting Labour and Jeremy Corbyn to being a pretty hardcore Tory and actually Tory deputy chairman at one point, and then onto a fringe party like Reform, really has any convictions for any of them. It makes it pretty plain to see that the ideology Lee Anderson is most devoutly dedicated to is the cult of self and the law of wealth. And there were rumours, of course, that he was offered a substantial amount of money by Richard Tice shortly before he deferred to reformUK. I don't think he's answered that, but I'm just asking questions. At around the same time as the Farage riot started, Lee took to Twitter to have a moan about his local travel lodge. I would imagine he wanted to get in on the action a bit. Remember, for a few days, the likes of Farage, Anderson, Tyson Co. had managed to convince a few thousand gammon-faced and gormless balloon-headed bellends that they were on the verge of a great revolution and it was time to start burning mosques and beating up brown people on the streets. Years of utter bullshit from the far-right client media and the Tories had convinced them that they were the silent majority, when in fact they were just the loud minority, and Lee wanted to be riding the wave of a racist revolution with everyone else who was taking our country back. Lee was maybe hoping to get his local travel lodge on the list of those that, his followers could pop round and set fire to with complete ignorant disregard for human life. So he pretended on Twitter that his constituents were concerned about there being illegal migrants there. There were in fact no illegal migrants there at all. Lee was wrong and racist, as usual, in his assumptions, and he was told quite quickly, within an hour, in fact, by some other people on Twitter. But was he contrite? No, was he fuck. He followed it up with another tweet saying, "I've been in touch with Travelodge, who have told me that they're not housing illegal migrants in their Sutton in Ashfield hotel. I have to take them at their word." Subtly suggesting they might be lying, a bit like Farage did. However, he then just continued with the same bullshit he'd been saying anyway, adding, "I do not want groups of young men who have entered our country illegally roaming our streets. It's not racist or bigoted to say this. I love my constituency and will do whatever it takes to protect it." Apparently that includes telling lies about nurses staying in the local travel lodge. Lee had been told that the people staying in the travel lodge were actually NHS nurses on a family break, but he didn't mention that at that point. Instead, he decided to just continue using the incorrect and ignorant terms of young men who have entered our country illegally. Lee is very stupid without a doubt, but he's said that term and been pulled up on it many, many times before, and he's been reminded that it is not illegal to enter the country to seek asylum, so none of these people are illegal. It's just bigoted and racist to say so. He says he's not bigoted and racist though, he loves his country, he loves his constituency. Yeah, surely. Fuck's sake. Let's just have a quick reminder of why Mr. Anderson managed to end up with the name 30p Lee. He began his political journey as a Labour councillor, but he quite quickly moved to the Nasty Party, and it's worth noting his second wife is actually still a Tory councillor. I can't imagine the sheer bigotry and bollocks that must be bloviated around that kitchen table. But it means he's always had quite good reason to try and just pretend the poverty and destitution that the Tory party caused over 14 long years just simply didn't exist. I can't find anything about him making comments about food banks when he was working for Labour. But when he was a Tory twat, he decided to loudly proclaim that the only reason anybody needed to use a food bank was because they were too stupid to cook or budget properly. It wasn't the Conservatives' fault for forcing people to accept real terms pay cuts year on year while they allowed food and energy prices to soar. No, it wasn't that at all, no. But Lee decided the best thing to do was go to a local food bank and hang around for a few patronising hours to tell them what they were doing wrong. This food bank was lucky enough to have the use of an industrial kitchen though, and Lee witnessed a batch cooking session. He was told that when cooking using fresh ingredients in bulk like that, on that scale, meals could be made for as little as 30 pence, and he took it literally. Lee Anderson went away and proclaimed for anybody and everybody who would listen, and even during a debate in Commons, that he'd seen it proven that a family could make meals for as little as 30 pence a day if they put the effort in. He'd seen it with his own eyes. What he didn't mention was that the ingredients had been bought in bulk and prepared by somebody who was trained to know what they were doing. Not something that most people can do at home. The food bank also had multiple ovens running all day. Not really something most people have at home and couldn't afford the energy to run if they did. And he didn't mention that the food bank had a walk-in freezer where they could batch store huge amounts of meals as well, which most people don't tend to have at home. Lee was talking absolute bollocks and making a fucking fool of himself as usual, but the moniker stuck, and he continues to occasionally say ridiculous things about food banks and poverty and the people who are stuck in them today. Though he tends to concentrate on getting things wrong about asylum seekers rather than getting things wrong about food banks and food bank users these days. Apparently, Reform doesn't really give a toss about food hunger. It's all about the racism and the money for them, isn't it? You know, so Lee doesn't give a shit if people are starving anymore. He's stuck with the name though. 30p Lee. You're lucky to be able to afford a fucking onion for 30p nowadays. Cheeky bastard. 30p Lee has had a lot of other things to say about other matters over the years too. He's not just content to tell lies about Labour or Sadiq Khan or invent phantom illegal migrants in his local travel lodge, no. Now that he's told us that all people who use food banks are just too stupid to cook meals for 30p, he hasn't really added much to that, and the moniker's stuck. But that doesn't mean he hasn't come out with a few other pearls of wisdom. Well, it's not really pearls of wisdom when he comes out with them, are they? They're more like pearls of polished dog shite. Sometimes he's offensive, quite often he's offensive. Occasionally he says something that's actually right, but even a stopped clock is right twice a day, isn't it? I think we'll end on having a little look at just some of the truly stupid things he's said and done. But I'm sure there'll be other ones that you remember that I've forgotten. Bear in mind, this is the man who Rishi Sunak made deputy chairman of the Conservative Party. Lee likes the idea of hanging people. Yeah, you heard that right. He thinks we should bring back capital punishment. He's not the only one, though. Priti Patel famously once said that we should resume not just hanging, but public hanging. And do you know what? I think she actually meant it. I don't think it was a slip of the tongue. So it's not surprising, really, that Lee thinks we should turn back the clock 60-odd years to 1967. Start swinging people from the frigging gallows again, is it? No. To make his point, during an interview with The Spectator, just before he was made chairman, he said, "Nobody has ever committed a crime after being executed. You know that, don't you? 100% success rate. Nobody has ever done anything after being executed, Lee. You gormless friggin' knobhead." He also suggested that we should charter Navy frigates to return asylum seekers to France, because to them the streets of the UK are paved with gold and it's a way of leaving that scruffy fucking manky little tent in France. He actually did swear when he was getting interviewed there as well. I didn't add that in. I mean, I certainly can't judge him for swearing, but it seems a bit odd coming from someone who was just about to be made deputy chairman of the Conservative Party, doesn't it? I'm not sure how he's paying for those frigates or the vast amount of sailors and staff that would be needed to operate them. Or how he's convincing the Royal Navy to start sending its state-of-the-art modern warships to piss about in the English Channel, satisfying racists standing on the cliffs of Dover with the Fisher-Price binoculars. Remember when he refused to watch the England final because the players had taken the knee in support of Black Lives Matter? He tried to suggest that he knew what they were doing it for more than they did somehow, and talked a load of bollocks all over Twitter about virtue signalling. He made a right prick of himself, and basically everyone just thought he was a dickhead. Apparently he wants people to think he doesn't care whether Black Lives Matter, or I don't know, I'm not sure what point he was trying to make with that one. Oh, and apparently there are very few real asylum seekers, according to Lee. He was being interviewed about it once, and he got a little bit carried away and a little bit too broad in the subject of what he was talking about. He said, "They get here and they know how to fill out the forms. They're like disabled people. A lot of them just know how to fill out the forms to get what they want. They say they're disabled, but they're not." Maybe sensing that he'd actually managed to insult two separate groups of people in just one sentence, he decided to try and underline that one and drum up a bit of support from the interviewer, saying, They say they're disabled and they're not. They do say that. So come on, now let's be right about it." He didn't get very much support from the interviewer. God help your nan if she's black and she's got one leg. Lee thinks she's committing some sort of immoral heist on taxpayers' money and he's coming for her. Yeah. Thank you for watching if you've gotten this far. I'm sure there are things 30p Lee has said or done that you have thought were particularly offensive. Let me know in the comments if so. I've probably left a few big ones out. I'm fed up with wasting my time on people like him now though. He was always a idiot from the start, wasn't he? He's a prime example of the type of pointless prick that would never have gotten anywhere near the House of Commons if it wasn't for Brexit, Ballbag Johnson and the likes of GBBs trying to pretend that he is someone whose opinion matters. He's definitely more suited to being a big stupid fish in a small pond with his reform buddies than he is to being an MP in any sort of serious party though. Man, you haven't said that. Can we even say the Conservatives are a serious party now? Were they even a serious party when they gave him a job in 2019? Seems like a long time ago now, doesn't it? 2019, when he came onto the scene. But anyway, he's not involved in making policies anymore, thankfully. So it's a lot easier to just laugh at him. And if you have had a giggle with me, then just check whether you've subscribed and hit the like button before you go. If you'd like to help out a bit further, there are links to PayPal, Patreon, and the join button for memberships is below, or you can just buy me a coffee, which is all very, very much appreciated. Now, of course, there is a lot more we could say about Lee Anderson, and that's not all I could say about Lee Anderson, but it's as much of what I've got to say as I'm going to say today. Ta-ra-la. In fact, Lee's done a bit of flip-flopping himself. He's managed to flip and flop and slip and flip and flop and flip and flop and slip and flop and I sound like Bill and Ben on LSD.